Herbert Mullin, a name etched into the grim annals of California's criminal history, stands as a chilling testament to the lethal intersection of mental illness and societal fear. Convicted as a serial killer, Mullin proffered a motive unlike many others. He claimed his brutal murders were a necessary sacrifice, a desperate act to prevent a cataclysmic earthquake from devastating California. Between 1972 and 1973, across the scenic yet unsuspecting landscapes of Santa Cruz and Santa Clara counties, Mullin was responsible for the deaths of 13 individuals. His twisted rationale centered on a profound delusion that human sacrifices were imperative to appease a higher power, thereby averting an apocalyptic tremor along the notorious San Andreas Fault. Born in 1947, Herbert Mullin's early life presented a veneer of normalcy. He was a high school athlete, seemingly popular among his peers, and showed no overt signs of the darkness that would later consume him. However, this facade began to crumble in his late teens and early 20s, coinciding with a significant descent into drug use, particularly LSD. This period marked the beginning of a profound mental health crisis. Mullin was subsequently diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that led to multiple commitments to mental institutions. Long before the murders commenced, he exhibited a clear history of severe delusions and debilitating hallucinations, signals of a mind increasingly detached from reality. The social climate of California in the early 1970s provided a complex backdrop to Mullin's unraveling. It was an era characterized by counterculture movements and widespread drug experimentation, elements that could exacerbate pre-existing vulnerabilities. Simultaneously, there was a heightened public awareness of seismic activity and the ever-present threat of a major earthquake in California. The state lived under the shadow of the Big One, a catastrophic earthquake prophesied with growing frequency. Popular culture and media often amplified these fears, depicting apocalyptic scenarios that resonated deeply with public anxiety. This pervasive fear occasionally intersected with fringe beliefs, where some individuals connected natural disasters with spiritual retribution or the need for specific sacrifices. Within this environment, Mullin's delusional system took root and flourished. He genuinely believed he was receiving telepathic messages, which he interpreted as divine instructions to kill. In his mind, these acts were not criminal, but rather heroic, a means to prevent the impending geological catastrophe. Mullin saw himself as a savior, tasked with an extraordinary and gruesome duty rather than a cold-blooded killer. His actions, he believed, were commanded by a higher power, making him an instrument of salvation. It is noteworthy that his own mother had expressed fears of an earthquake, a detail that may have inadvertently fueled and shaped the specific nature of his delusions. The victims of Herbert Mullin were remarkably diverse, ranging from unsuspecting hitchhikers to a Catholic priest. There was no discernible pattern in his victim selection beyond opportunity, a characteristic that initially baffled investigators. Some victims were known to Mullin, while others were complete strangers caught in the crosshairs of his distorted reality. The police response to these seemingly unconnected murders was fraught with challenges. The disparate nature of the killings, coupled with the lack of an obvious motive or common thread, made it incredibly difficult to link them in the early stages. This created an atmosphere of public fear and placed immense pressure on law enforcement to identify the perpetrator. The legal landscape of the time also grappled with concepts like diminished capacity, posing significant challenges in determining an individual's sanity versus insanity in court proceedings. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Herbert Mullin's delusions solidified against this backdrop of societal unease, transforming abstract fears into concrete, horrific directives. He was convinced that a specific number of human sacrifices were required to buy time, to delay the inevitable seismic event he believed was imminent. His twisted logic dictated that each life taken was a strategic maneuver, a ward against the ultimate destruction. The specific nature of his victims often reflected his immediate disordered thoughts rather than any consistent typology. He perceived certain individuals as contributing to the imbalance that threatened the earth, or as necessary offerings to prevent the cataclysm. This deeply ingrained belief system, born from severe mental illness, defined his actions. His mother's anxiety about earthquakes, a common concern in California, likely provided a seed for his delusions, which then spiraled far beyond normal apprehension into a full-blown psychotic conviction. The diverse demographics of his victims further complicated the initial investigations. Mullin did not target a specific age group, gender, or social class. His initial victim, Lawrence White, was a 55-year-old drifter whom Mullin encountered by chance. Mullin claimed White was a biblical Jonah, a necessary sacrifice. This unpredictability made it nearly impossible for law enforcement to establish a pattern or profile, delaying the identification of a single perpetrator. The randomness of his attacks served as a terrifying element, contributing to the pervasive fear gripping the communities. Whether it was a hitchhiker, a priest, or a group of campers, Mullin's rationale for each murder was internally consistent within his delusional framework, yet externally contradictory and baffling to those trying to understand his motives. The Santa Cruz and Santa Clara County law enforcement agencies faced unprecedented challenges. The murders, initially appearing as isolated incidents, lacked clear connections. There was no consistent weapon, no singular method, and no apparent motive that would immediately link the deaths. This absence of a common thread meant that various departments were investigating seemingly unrelated homicides, unaware they were pursuing the same individual. The pressure on police mounted as the body count rose, and the public grew increasingly terrified, demanding answers. The media, often sensationalizing the cases, heightened the climate of fear, further complicating the investigative process. Each new victim escalated the urgency, yet Mullin's internal world remained opaque to investigators. The legal system also had to contend with the complex concept of diminished capacity, a defense argument that would later play a significant role in Mullin's trial. This legal principle acknowledges that a defendant's mental state, while not constituting full insanity, might impair their ability to form the specific intent required for certain crimes, such as first-degree murder. Proving sanity versus insanity in court, especially in cases involving severe mental disorders like paranoid schizophrenia, presented a formidable challenge. The line between a morally culpable act and an act driven by profound delusion was often blurred, requiring extensive psychiatric evaluation and expert testimony. Mullin's case would become a crucible for these legal and psychological debates, forcing a deeper examination of how society defines criminal responsibility in the face of severe mental illness. His actions, while undeniably horrific, were rooted in a mind profoundly alienated from reality, convinced of a mission to save the world, not destroy it. This fundamental disconnect would be at the core of his defense and the subsequent judicial proceedings. The series of horrific acts began in October 1972 with the murder of Lawrence White, a 55-year-old drifter whom Mullin encountered by chance. Mullin, in his deluded state, claimed White was a biblical Jonah, a necessary sacrifice to initiate the earthquake-preventing ritual. White was brutally beaten to death. The violence escalated in January 1973 when Mullin picked up Mary Guilfoyle, a hitchhiker, whom he then strangled, convinced she was another vital sacrifice for the earthquake. Just weeks later, in February 1973, Mullin's delusions led him to Father Henri Thomé, a Catholic priest. Mullin, after confessing his sins to the priest, then tragically stabbed him, believing Thomé was delaying the crucial seismic event by not taking his confession seriously enough, thus needing to be silenced. The escalating spree continued in February 1973, claiming multiple lives in rapid succession. 4 teenage boys, Jim Gianera, David Alan Graham, Robert Spector and Mark Falcone, were camping when Mullin attacked them, shooting and stabbing each one. He was convinced they were part of a cult actively preventing the earthquake he desperately sought to avert. The same month, Mullin encountered Fred Perez, a fisherman whom he shot, believing Perez was involved in a larger conspiracy. The horror reached a peak with the murder of Kathy Francis and her 2 young sons, Demon and Todd. Mullin claimed Kathy was involved in witchcraft and their deaths would cleanse the earth. His final victim in this spree was Jim "Skip" Mullin, a friend with no relation to Herbert. Herbert shot him, convinced his friend was delaying the earthquake by not turning him in to the authorities, thereby failing to fulfill his role in the delusional prophecy. Mullin's reign of terror concluded abruptly with his apprehension shortly after the murder of Jim "Skip" Mullin. Eyewitness accounts, particularly from the area near the last crime scene, provided crucial leads that led to his capture. Once in custody, Mullin voluntarily confessed to all 13 murders, providing chillingly intricate details of each killing. His confessions were often intertwined with his elaborate earthquake delusion, revealing a mind completely detached from conventional reality. Throughout his confession, Mullin exhibited no remorse, genuinely believing his actions were justified and even heroic, conducted under divine command. Subsequent psychiatric evaluations consistently diagnosed Mullin with paranoid schizophrenia. However, experts disagreed on his legal sanity at the time of the crimes, a critical distinction for the judicial process. The trial was a contentious battle between the prosecution, which argued for premeditation and responsibility, and the defense, which asserted Mullin's insanity and diminished capacity due to his severe mental illness. Testimony from prominent psychiatrists on both sides formed the backbone of the legal arguments, focusing intensely on whether Mullin could comprehend the moral wrongfulness of his horrific actions. Ultimately, the jury delivered a complex verdict. Herbert Mullin was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, specifically for the killings of Jim Gianera and Fred Perez, and 8 counts of second-degree murder for the other victims. He was sentenced to life in prison. The jury's decision to reject a complete insanity defense suggested they believed Mullin retained some understanding of his actions, albeit through a severely distorted lens of delusion. Confined to prison, Mullin continued to espouse his earthquake delusions, maintaining that his actions had successfully averted the catastrophic event. He maintained a relatively low profile within the prison system, but was consistently denied parole. Each denial cited his persistent lack of insight into his crimes and his unwavering adherence to his original delusions, indicating an ongoing and untreated mental illness. The case of Herbert Mullin captivated the public and media, generating sensationalized coverage due to the unusual and terrifying motive. He became known as the Earthquake Killer, fueling public fear and fascination. His trials sparked widespread debate about the role of mental illness in criminal responsibility, challenging the legal system to reconcile justice for victims with the complexities of severe psychological disorders. Mullin's case remains a significant study in forensic psychology and criminology, distinguishing itself from cases driven by sexual gratification or power, aligning more closely with killers like Son of Sam, who also operated under profound delusional systems. His story serves as a stark and chilling reminder of the destructive power of untreated severe mental illness and its tragic impact on both individuals and society.